2, 1. Hey everyone, what's up? Welcome to Simulation. I'm Alan Sakian. We are sitting down with Dekai, Dr. Dekai. Thanks for coming out of the show. I'm fantastic.
Happy to be here.
Really appreciate it. And as you guys know, we like to help make very complex subjects really relatable for people and inspire you to build the future. So today we're going to be talking about language. We're going to be talking about cognitive science. And we're going to unpack this in a lot of detail. It's going to be fun.
All right.
Let's do this. So you have a long background in this field.
Yeah.
From all the way from University of California, San Diego, then to Kellogg and the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and then to Berkeley.
Yeah. Well, Berkeley actually came long before the MBA from Kellogg and HUST.
Okay.
But
So is the opposite? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And so then, like, on this path, where exactly were you like, I know that I like language, I like computer science?
Oh man.
How did you figure that out?
You know, I really don't know. So I grew up in bizarre circumstances in the middle of the country. I was born in St. Louis, heavily grew up in Chicago, and you know, I was apparently picking out melodies on pianos when I was 2. I don't remember this. So I've been, you know, sort of like musically embroiled since I was speaking. But then I was also, you know, sort of challenged with this multilingual environment because, you know, coming from a family where my parents had immigrated as teenagers to the U.S., we had multiple languages floating around, and this is in Middle America, right? And so I'm seeing radically different cultures and languages and music. You know, like I was getting trained classically, you know, in the School of Music at Northwestern University, but at the same time, Chicago is like the home of the blues and, you know, much of American music. And my blues and jazz teachers are busily subverting everything they were teaching in the classical conservatory style. So, you know, it was just a mishmash. And so by the time I got to, you know, back to San Diego in high school and dropped out of high school and then went into UCSD, I was like, what am I going to do? And I found myself picking, because UCSD has one of these like Oxford, Cambridge style college systems. So you don't just go to UCSD, you go to one of the specific undergrad colleges there. And each one has a different philosophy, right? And the college I picked, which is Revelle College, was the Renaissance ideal liberal arts kind of college where for the first 2 years you did absolutely nothing but satisfy these insane demanding requirements. So everybody, no matter what your major was taking huge bucket loads of philosophy and literature and history and social sciences, as well as the calculus and the you know, bio and physics and fine arts, foreign languages and stuff like that. And so you didn't even get to start taking your specialization until your 3rd year, basically, which sent all the other engineering students running, screaming away from Revelle College into less taxing colleges with the requirements. But I was just having a blast, you know. It was like sort of, okay, this is like everything I love. UCSD was a pioneer in that day and age of computer music. And
Kind of reminds me of the Jesuit education system too.
Yeah,
very Renaissance.
There's something about that, yeah. I mean, maybe I've been colored by that background, but like to me it feels very weird that we live in an era where education has been pigeonholing us into specialties, right?
Totally.
Like sort of like, oh, you're an engineer, or you know, you're a musician, so you can't possibly do blah blah blah.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird, right? And it's an artifact of the last century or so. Before that, it was like you either were educated and a thinker or a creative, you know, sort of person, or you weren't. It wasn't like, oh, you only have this very, very narrow specialty. Mm-hmm. You're drawing from many different sources of human knowledge, and that is where the advances come from. And, you know, maybe we'll come back to this topic, but I think in this day and age where we're having, again, this dialogue about what AI is doing to the future of society and employment and labor.
Yeah.
I really think we need to go back there very quickly and become whole persons again.
Exactly. And a lot of our show is polymathic.
Exactly, yeah.
Very Renaissance, jack of all trades or Jane of all trades in that sense. And we find that to be very important, especially for the future with the proliferation of exponential technologies into civilization. We'll need some sort of better path for adults to help kids get inspired by a diverse array of subjects, as well as going deep into subjects continuing to do that. Now, you're talking about your background and kind of like where you figured out. I forgot to mention that you're super musically talented as well, but the combination of music and language has been fascinating for you, as well as your music actually, I think, has augmented your engineering abilities, and your engineering abilities have augmented your musical abilities. And I think that's a key from the Renaissance period as well, as people were both sciencey as well as musically inclined, and having that is huge for the way that you think about.
Yeah, I mean, nobody told people like Da Vinci, oh no, you can't play music because you're an architect or you're an anatomist, or, I mean, it's just kind of, to me, these things they're all leveraging each other. But, when I look at this from a cognitive science point of view, that makes tremendous amounts of sense, right? Because, I mean, look, if you look at language, when I went into AI, I was interested in cognition, and of course, AI has many subfields. People talk about vision, people talk about planning and robotics, and expert systems and gaming, and there's all sorts of different applications of AI. Why I chose language is, out of all of those different applications, language is unique in the following sense. It's not only an application of AI to be able to understand language, translate language, whatever. Language is also the foundation of intelligence. Without language, we can't think abstract thoughts beyond things like ouch, or I'm cold, or I'm hungry. Almost every thought we have is an abstract thought that we're making use of our linguistic abilities to be able to think. Language structures thought, and so there's this what I call the grand cycle of intelligence, right?
That's really important to make clear.
It's super important. I mean, that's kind of the slogan from the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, that the languages that strongly determine the kind of thoughts that you'll think.
Totally. If the language has a tendency to be a little bit more aggressive, or a tendency to be a little bit more kind, maybe there's a bunch of different ways to say the word love. Maybe there's only one way to say the word love. Language is also what made civilization what it is today. A lot of what it is today is language. Now, and can we do a little evolution as well along this journey? Go ahead.
Yeah. Just like there's some really great examples of this I love. So like when I teach this, sometimes I'm teaching in Asia to Chinese-speaking audiences, and I ask them, okay, think about, say, the campaign slogan of our previous American president, right? You remember what that was, right?
Yeah, make
Yes,
America
we
great
can.
again.
No, the previous one.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yes, we can. Yeah.
And yes, we can, right? And so how would you translate that into a Chinese campaign slogan? And they're like, because number one, there's no word for yes in Chinese.
Whoa! Wait, what? Is there a word for no?
Also no.
What?
Well, so here's the thing, right? There's words
work?
for things like true. There's words
false.
There's more abstract words for like agree or not agree. And there's words for things like correct. Right. But if somebody comes up to you and says, "Have you eaten yet?" You're not going to say true. Right. You're not going to say correct
or agree.
You're not going to say agree.
Yeah.
Right. And so that kind of
what do you
affirmative
say
in Chinese, you would, if literally what you would say is eaten.
Which is?
Eaten.
Eaten.
Right. So I would repeat the verb.
Oh, interesting.
Right? to indicate
interesting.
agreement.
Yeah.
So there's no word for yes.
So,
Right? So you can't translate
so
that.
if we shortened it down like, oh, have you eaten yet today? I could just literally ask you, eaten? And then you'd be like, eaten.
Yeah, you probably say eaten or not.
Eaten or
roughly.
not.
Yeah.
Eaten or not? And then
Yeah.
you'd be like, not or eaten. But you wouldn't say not, you would say
Not yet.
not yet.
Or haven't.
Haven't.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Roughly.
That's
Again,
already
rough
so
translations.
interesting. Okay,
It's hard
continue.
to translate, right?
Yeah.
And so then, okay, so there's no word for yes, and then we can, right? So there's a word for we, there's a word for can, right? But if you put that together, it would be sort of as if somebody came up to you and said, "We are able to," right? So you're sitting there going, okay.
Yeah.
Right? And these are three of the simplest, shortest English words that kids learn first, and yet we can't even translate that, right? And there's similar things in reverse. One word that Chinese kids learn first, which is almost impossible to translate into English with the correct associations.
Which is what?
In Chinese, it's guai, and it means roughly that the kid is a. See, I can't translate it. People say good or obedient, but that has a kind of a negative connotation.
Yeah.
Sort of a timid connotation in English.
But it is supposed to be good in.
But in Chinese, it's ultimate praise.
It's ultimate praise.
Right? It's
Guai.
really, really positive.
Guai.
And the interesting thing is that there is actually a good translation into French, right? Like, so in French, the word sage is a fairly good translation of that, which is where we get the word sage from. But there's been a semantic shift there into English, right? But so you see how strongly language influences the way we think, and therefore the culture, right?
Yep.
Whether you even have a word for it or not. And so language, very strongly is the basis for, how we think, how we frame things, human intelligence. But then the interesting thing to me is that music is actually the foundation of language, right? So our ancestors were singing before they were talking.
And we were groaning before we were singing.
Indeed. Yeah. I mean, there's only a handful of species that actually can do imitative, creative singing. Okay, so I'm not talking about like hardwired barks or something like that, or mating calls, right? We're talking about, that's an interesting sound, let me imitate it, right? And that's where the creativity starts coming, right? And those species are actually only a few species of primates, like bonobos. Not most primates don't do it. Whales and dolphins.
They do. The same.
Possibly
Birds?
Elephants, not sure. A few species of birds, very few. Parrots, cockatoos, ravens, crows. And the interesting thing about all of this, even though these are different families, evolutionarily, all of those are the most intelligent representatives of their family.
Of their families, yeah.
Right.
That's
that is not an accident.
That's not an accident, yeah. That's a good point. Yep. So the species that learn to communicate with one another through an abstraction of the context of what's around them, then they became kind of the most, they evolved the most, or they achieved the most, or they were able to progress the most.
Yeah, they're, exactly. But with this imitative and creative singing ability, they're able to start using that for communicative purposes and to evolve new communication methods and framing. And so over, the million years or so of our evolution, our linguistic abilities have strengthened, and they were probably scaffolded on earlier music abilities, and then they sort of continued to co-evolve, right? And so our music abilities then took advantage of the stronger linguistic abilities, and so on.
Yep.
And so you have these interesting grand cycles of intelligence where language enables us to think more complex thoughts that let us create more complex languages, that let us create more complex thoughts. And meanwhile, music is doing the same thing with language.
Yep.
And, when you realize that, then it becomes very little surprise that music, training, especially early music training, is incredibly well correlated with pretty much every measure of intelligence that you can imagine. Whether it's verbal literacy or memory or obviously tonal recognition.
Early music training is
IQ, whatever.
very important for early childhood development, and then also for long-term intelligence.
Absolutely, as well as multilingualism. If you teach kids a second language, a third language when they're young, again, super strong correlations, and this is all related. And then like when you look at fMRI studies, brain scans, and you discover that music and language are using the same areas of the brain. All of this sort of makes sense in the context of understanding how human intelligence evolved.
I really like how we can explain it from a perspective of initially just figuring out how to vibrate these vocal cords and make some sort of a gesture towards one another about safety or danger or hunger or sleep, and these basic lower hierarchy needs. And then it became some sort of a little bit more singing, a little more of the singing and the music, and then the words, the association to that piece of wood actually became wood or stick. And then we were able to then from there slowly but surely build up this insane vocabulary that we have now. Dictionary is just full of so many words. And then the way that I think we'll get to this, but I really want to talk about the way that the Pareto distribution applies to language, as well as George Ziff and Ziff's law. I find that so fascinating. So maybe now because I guess we laid out the evolution fairly well. I wanted to make sure we did that. Now, as you start getting into this, we talked a bit about early childhood development, the importance of music, the importance of multilingualism in the youth, and then how that translates to one's ability to see things in a new perspective when they're older. So where do we go from there? Like, as you're studying this, what did you figure out about cognitive science and how it's applied to computer science, and what are the cool takeaways that we can take from that and build the future with that?
So, here's the thing. I've always been fascinated by this question from a scientific standpoint of what human intelligence is. It's one of the grand mysteries of science, right? And language and music being pretty much the only thing that we humans do better than all other species. I mean, think about it, right? We don't see more sharply. We don't climb trees that well anymore. We don't swim well. We don't fly. We don't run faster. We're not stronger. We're really pretty lame as a species on the whole.
We're a small bit on the electromagnetic spectrum. Yeah.
The only thing that saves us is these unique language and music capabilities, right? And so I knew I wanted to work on this, and the question to me, the natural question to me, seemed to be, well, so how do humans actually learn this stuff? How did you learn language?
How do we learn it? Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, how is it that by the time you turned 4, you were able to speak?
Yeah.
And so this was something that I found fascinating, and during the times that I was doing cognitive science, initially at UCSD and then as a Ph.D. student at Berkeley, AI and cognitive science were really dominated by this rule-based, logic-based, knowledge-based paradigm, right? And the idea was there, okay, we can write down logical inference rules that will capture our knowledge, whether it's about syntax or the real world and things like that. And so, the big enterprise back then was for people to be writing these huge knowledge bases out of logical formalisms. And my advisor in my first year there had me come in, and he said, look, I was fortunate to join a group that was building one of the seminal dialogue systems, right? And so, like Siri and Alexa and all that kind of stuff, right? This was the group that I was at was sort of the beginnings of that sort of dialogue system. Anybody could walk up. It was called the Unix Consultant, right? And the people on it were people like Peter Norvig and Yigal Ahrens and Jim Martin and Jim Mayfield and David Chen and many other people who've gone on to do wonderful things. And my advisor said, look, we've got the syntactic parser, we've got the semantic interpreter, we've got a goal analyzer so that you can recognize the plans of the person who's asking the question and understand what he's really trying to get at. We've got a planner that will figure out the solution. We've got a user model to figure out, well, is this person naive or are they an expert? Sort of at what level do we have to speak to them? And we've got a generator that'll give you an answer. And we're just missing this tiny little piece, he said. We're missing this piece because the parser will tell you, oh, here's the verb and here's the noun phrase and the direct object and all that kind of stuff. And the semantic interpreter, however, it takes as input a logical symbol, a node, that, for example, if the user said, how do I cut the disk space, right? So cut's the verb. Disk space is the direct object. But like the semantic interpreter needs to know is which node, which symbol in the knowledge representation are we using for the verb? Is it cut as in slice, cut the bread? Is it cut the grass, cut sense of cut? So it means to shorten. Is it cut class, which means to skip, or is it cut disk spaces to reduce, or is it cut the cheese? So there's.
Wow.
And so I just need
That's
you
crazy.
to why don't you just take this, a month to write a bridge between the parser and the semantic interpreter that will figure out which of those it is.
Whoa, that's a tough job.
So I went away, and in less than a week later, I was back in his office and said, there is no way you can solve this without probability. There's so many sources of evidence, and it's all matters of degree, right? There's no absolute logical rule about this. And there began this 6-year battle with my advisor, and just sort of. I was, back then, to argue for machine learning approaches, to argue for probabilistic approaches and neural net approaches was heretical in the field. You can get published. Nobody would. Everything was about logic, right? And a handful of us in the field were fighting this battle and saying, look, we can't really solve the AI problem by modeling the world, trying to write down all the rules of everything in the world. Yeah. We have to model the mind. How does the mind learn about the world? That's the only way it's ever going to scale. And so that was fun. And about 2 years after that, I'd passed all my exams, Ph.D. exams, qualifying at Berkeley. Took off supposedly for a summer, traveled around the world, and Silk Road and Pakistan and India and Tibet and all over Europe. Awesome. And I was having such a blast. I ran out of money sort of at the end of the summer. I found myself in Germany and called up a friend of a friend and said, hey, I've run out of money. I want to keep sustaining this travel habit. Can you find me a high-paying programming job? Right? And he said, I can, but I've just started this cognitive AI group here at the Technical University in Munich. Can you come in and interview with me first? And so I said, great. And I immediately got sucked back into research, but I had my freedom because my advisor was like across the ocean. And so I had a whole year to explore neural networks and learning approaches, probabilistic approaches, and travel every weekend. And so by the time I got back, I was like firmly set at Berkeley to do this, no matter what it took. And about 6 months before graduation, one day after yet another chapter draft had gone to my advisor, and it had always come back covered with red ink. Right? And this one day came back and he goes, Takai, I finally understand what you've been saying all these years. This is incredible. This is the best thing ever. And I made a total convert out of him 6 months ago.
Wow.
So yeah, that was kind of the beginnings of the whole machine learning probabilistic approach. That thesis was actually the first ever application of something called maximum entropy modeling in natural language understanding.
I want to get there. What I was thinking about as you were talking was all of the diverse minds that have been working on this for the last couple of decades, and all of the intense work that has went into it to actually be able to understand it well. So I was just thinking about these groups of people that had to work so hard on figuring out what are the fundamentals of language, and how, like you said earlier, where that gap that was missing. This is a very tough thing to figure out. So you were going into maximum entropy, yes, and the model of human perception. This is interesting. Teach us about this.
So I think the fundamental problem is that to figure out which sense of cut this is, you have to understand so much of the context. Right? You have to understand who's doing the cutting, what is the thing that's being cut, what is our contextual situation,
Yep.
right? What is your desire? Like what do I know about what you really want,
Yep.
right? And so there's so many sources of evidence, and that's the simple case where it's just a single verb that you're trying to disambiguate. Right? The more complex cases, you've got an entire construct, like an entire prepositional phrase or relative clause, and you're trying to figure out what is that attached to. You need some sort of a formalism that is, on the one hand, able to integrate in a consistent way evidence, degrees of support for various hypotheses. And on the other hand, you need something which is a formalism which is able to, or is amenable to machine learning, where given training data, you could actually estimate the parameters and or the structure of the model. Right? And so, I was doing this work in a context where none of the group around me had any idea about this stuff. So, I just found myself deep in the libraries with, pouring through old books about induction, philosophy of induction, right? And how you learn and what is probability theory and how do you justify inferences and things like that. And there were little pockets of people beginning to do, outside of natural language understanding, work on uncertain reasoning and machine learning using probabilistic approaches, but they were all not tackling the level of complexity that we have in natural language, right? One of the things that you still find about a lot of machine learning work is...
Should we show that example at some point that...
Yeah, absolutely.
Would now be a good time, or...
Yeah.
Think so?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, let's do it.
Can we switch over to...
let's do it.
Yeah. So that's my screen done. So if you've got imagine that you're an AI and you're trying to learn to make sense of what's in the world, and you come across a pattern, right? And there are lots of different kinds of patterns there are, but just to make this point clear so that you're looking at this without being colored by patterns that you're already familiar with, right? So you've got your blank slate, you come across a pattern, let's say it looks like this, right? And now at the same time, you hear this described to you in English. Right? That's how we as kids learn. We learn because we're seeing patterns in an environment and mom talks to us, right? And so you hear something and you begin to try to correlate what is the meaning of that. And so let's say that this is what you hear mom say. The question is, how on earth would you figure out what is the relationship between what mom said and the pattern? Right? Now, if you think about it a moment, there's a lot of potential complexity in here. Is that how the English relates to the pattern? Or is it this? In fact, even for this little short 7-word pattern, there's already over 5,000 possible relationships.
No,
And I'm
for just 5 items.
Yeah, and I'm oversimplifying here because I'm assuming that the translation between the pattern and the English is deterministic, that there's only one possible translation. Of course, typically that's even worse, right? And so this grows exponentially.
Holy
right?
cow.
It does this. And so if you look at the bottom number there,
That's like 2 trillion? No, that's way
that's
more.
like 2.4
Quadrillion.
quintillion
Quintillion.
possible relationships. And that's a short sentence, right? Many of the sentences that you read today will be over 200 words long. So you can just imagine how that's going to explode. Now, compare that to what your little human child has to do, right? By the time they've turned 4, they've mastered their mother tongue. They've mastered their native language. How many words of training data have they been exposed to in that entire lifetime?
That's right. I remember learning about the importance of having a lot of training data for young kids to learn from. If the vocabulary, if the breadth of the vocabulary of the parents is larger, that's important for the child's development.
And in fact, so there's a range, but the range is on the order of 15 million words only. It might be, 10 million on the lower end, 20 million on the upper end, but it's that order. And if you compare that, and that doesn't mean unique words, right? This includes all the repetitions, because we were talking about zip slop.
Oh, this includes all the repetitions?
This includes all the repetitions.
Oh, that's not even that much.
It's not even that much.
Yeah.
It's only 15 million words.
Yeah.
And if you compare that, even today, to the kinds of machine learning models that we see, especially deep learning models, which are even more data hungry, people are needing billions of training examples, trillions of examples, right? Because they're coping with stuff like this. And why do they need so much data? It's because the machine learning models are not really intelligent enough.
Intelligent enough, yeah.
They're brute force still. They're like trying to memorize off of the data because they're not making the abstractions, the generalizations intelligently enough from that small amount of data that humans can do. Right.
So the small amount of data in a young child can make the generalizations about language versus the machine intelligence trying to make generalizations with just 15 million words in the language is very difficult for them to figure it out right now. And so because of all the possible relationships between those words, if we're just having a large data set that they're just looking at to try and make relationships, that's more difficult than how the human brain parses the scenario and figures out. There's also other things, probably like the inflection in voice as well. You can tell when people are happy or sad, and
exactly. Right.
The emotional state of their faces, which machines aren't, they're not combining that yet, the words with the emotional states.
And though, earlier we were talking about all the different factors that you need to use when you're trying to figure out which sense of cut did you mean. And those are all additional contextual factors that nobody was thinking about using back then, that today, with these more probabilistic or neural models, we can easily handle. They're just all part of the contextual features. Right? You've got, if somebody says cut, it's very different from if somebody says cut.
Yeah. Yep. Now, so you ended up figuring out how to take all these different uses of the same word and differentiate between them, help a machine differentiate between them. Interesting. Now, how does one go about that?
You actually have to build feature recognizers for all these different kinds of context, and then you can put them into a maximum entropy model, or you can put them into other kinds of neural network models or probabilistic models. The interesting thing is that when you have to do this over an entire sentence, then you've got this sort of structural problem. And this sort of structural problem is not so easy to integrate everything into as your typical off-the-shelf machine learning toolkit, right? So the thing is, most of the toolkits out there still are kind of doing glorified multiple choice questions, right? Glorified regression models or classification. It just says, given this example, the correct answer is A, B, C, D, or E, right?
Yeah, with highest probability
Yeah.
with one of them.
But when you're talking about language understanding, language interpretation, what you're doing is you're taking an idea that's been framed in one way, and you're having to reframe it in a different way.
Yeah.
So that kind of reframing is not really a multiple choice question, right? Like if I give you a sentence in Japanese, let's say, right? How many possible hypotheses are there for what the English translation is? It's not going to be A, B, C, D, or E, right? The number of possible English sentences is enormous. It's like infinite, right? It's, as a multiple choice question, that doesn't really make sense. So this is why reframing, which is the basis of interpreting language and translating language, is fundamentally a much more difficult problem, but is the key to intelligence, right? Because that intelligence is about being able to take a pattern that you're perceiving and translating it into a more useful representation.
Yeah, that's a lot of what we do on the show.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There you go.
We take the brilliance from people and then we try and make it relatable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I see how language, there's thousands of languages. Are there?
Yeah, roughly 8,000.
8,000 languages.
Yeah. Many going extinct.
Yeah, that's
by
what
the
the
day.
Rosetta Project with Long Now is working on.
Yeah.
Preserving those languages. That's so interesting how language evolved and then how many languages are going extinct. Like, I think it's like a dozen every 2 weeks or something like that. It's yeah, I don't know exactly. I forgot what the exact number was, but just that
we need a universal language.
Yeah, that's
one language. No, how's that sound to you guys?
What do you think?
A living language that we
So,
all.
you know what? I think, and I'm going to have to back up a step to answer this, right? Because one of the things that happens to me a lot these days is people ask me, what's the next big thing in AI? And I kind of stop them and say, wait a minute, okay, first of all, the next big thing isn't big, it's small, right? Because real AI doesn't work on big data. Real AI is able to learn the right generalizations the way children do from small amounts of data. That's the true test of AI, right? And the next big thing isn't a thing. It's relating things. Mm-hmm. We have this tendency, especially in the Western philosophical tradition, goes back to Aristotle at least, of trying to reduce ideas to things, right? It's comforting because these abstract ideas that we have problems getting a hold on, if we can just objectify them, if we can turn them into objects, then it feels like, oh, okay, we can manipulate it. We've got control of it, right? And so we do this for tons of ideas. We do this for, like you think about ideas like temperature. It's not really a thing. Regret. Incrementalism. Morality. These are not really things, right? We use our metaphoric ability out of language to try to turn them into things to give us this illusion of control. But the thing is, that's not really what intelligence is about. It's not really the truth of the matter. The truth of the matter is not the object, right? The truth of the matter is actually subjective. It's how you perceive this thing. And so what you're doing is you're relating your visual representation of this to another representation that says, oh, that's a water bottle. or some other visual language. And so,
only because I have actually had a couple hundred examples of what that is in the past.
yeah,
And
exactly.
was initially
Right.
taught that label from the first or second example, and then now I carry that label with me.
So, you know, like what really makes the intelligence possible is your ability to translate from one representation into another representation. It's not the thing itself, it's the ability to translate between one thing and another thing. It's the relationship between the representations. And, you know, and so this tendency to try to objectify everything is everywhere in our training, in our development. It permeates the scientific culture, right? The scientific culture,
Yeah.
we try to, in modeling, we try to turn everything into things,
Yeah.
right? Because then we can make a theory about the things,
Yeah.
right? And so even in the study of language, in linguistics,
So
again,
where
you-
does
you
this
wanna get
as a
rid
water
of this-
bottle even live then? Where does that even?
It's the relationship ability, the ability to relate. That's the question. Where does that live?
Yeah, where does that live?
Right.
Yeah, the
it's
ability
not,
to relate.
Not the water bottle idea. It's the
Yeah.
relating
it,
ability
yeah.
idea.
'Cause- So
Right.
me branding it as a water bottle
Right.
from the first couple examples, and then relating to it as a water bottle over and over again. Where does that live? Where does that relation?
Yeah,
live?
and that's really the key to a lot of
Between
what
the
we did.
objects, then.
Yeah.
So between the
Yeah.
human and the object, that's where the relation exists.
Well, okay, we can look at it in the real world that way, but it's really not so much between the water bottle and up here. It's between your perception of the water bottle and what's up here.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to go all solipsist on you, but
well,
like,
we like solipsism. Yeah.
but you know, for all we know, there's no water bottle there. We just think there's a water bottle there because of
Yeah.
our perception. Anyway,
Yeah.
so like this goes back to modeling the mind rather than modeling the world, right? So what we're modeling is the relationship between the percept
Yep.
of the water bottle
Yep.
and the rest of what's
Rest of
going on up here, and that relationship, that's the key, right? So
Interesting. So the object
if you, yeah.
is kind of
So it's not so much the object, right?
Object,
So
yeah.
here's the thing, right? So science, notice by the way how science glorifies this notion of objectivity,
yes.
right? And science hates subjectivity. That bias is everywhere, right? But really, when you're talking about interpretation, when you're talking about translation, which is the fundamental building block of intelligence, that ability is a subjective ability. How you perceive the
translate,
bottle
how you
is
perceive
different from how other people might
perceive
translate the
it,
bottle,
yeah.
right? How you translate the pattern there is different. How you
Yeah.
translate the word cut is subjective. Subjectivity is actually the root of intelligence. And so
Interesting. But
even
so
scientists have
subjectivity
been
is the
blind to
root
this.
of intelligence until we make consensus around the subjective perceptions. Then objectivity is also
some degree.
Then objectivity is also a part of the root of intelligence.
to some degree.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I see how subjectivity is the root then of how I perceive, and then what that is logged as and interpreted as, and then how I perceive again, and how it's logged and interpreted and interplays within the reality that I live in, and the subjective understanding of that reality. And then if we can make objective understandings of the objects, like the water bottle, then we all have this name for the same object, which makes it easier for us to be like, pass me the water bottle. Can I fill your water bottle? Otherwise, we would have, how would I even communicate that phrase?
Right.
Can I fill up
We're
your
assuming
water
that we
bottle?
have a consensual reality here.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
But what would we use besides language? We couldn't. What's next? Like, what is next?
No, we would use language, but the thing is, there are many, many different languages, right? I mean, I'm sort of coming back to this question that Rod was asking about, like, is it that we need a universal language? And I'm going to hypothesize, no, it's not so much a universal language that we need. It's what's universal is the human ability to relate different languages.
Perceive and relate?
Different languages, many different representation
different
languages, right? See, because again, even in scientific thinking, it's the thinking has been colored by this objectification tendency. So Chomsky, right, thinks of language as a thing, right, and is all about what is the grammar of that thing, what is the structure of that thing, right? But language by itself as a thing is useless. So, picture yourself as a caveman, right, and somebody behind you yells, "Look out for the tiger behind you." If you do the Chomsky thing and you just go, that was a very grammatical sentence. That was a good thing. Your dinner.
Yeah.
What kept us alive is this
that
subjective ability to relate that to a symbolic representation or visual representation that was more useful in your head because it told you, run like mad.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's that relating ability that's interesting. So Chomsky, has spent a lot of his career asking what are the universal properties of human language? And I think the right place to be asking the question is really what are the universal properties of our ability to relate languages?
Relatability of
Yeah,
language.
relatability between languages. And that's where the real power comes from.
Yeah.
Thinking, our ability to create, to think, it comes from the richness of being able to take an idea that is framed in one language and rapidly shift it, translate it into a different representation that gives us a new insight, and then shift that into yet another representation. And so really good creative thinking is all about constant translation between many different languages that we're playing with.
Wow. Just makes me understand even more so why being a polymath is so important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the relatability between the different languages that are being spoken across different interests that people have and the complexities of those interests as you dive even deeper into those fields, how to make them relatable across these different specialties and languages is so interesting. Because the language, that's off 15-minute timer. Thank you, Ron. There it is again, because it's so cool. Okay, oh, you were trying to DJ it a little?
It was on loop by accident. I'm never going to get ahead in this business.
This is good, the DJ that music. Wow, yeah, the relatability. Yeah. Maybe let's unpack the relatability with the Pareto distribution at the same time, because I want to hear your thoughts about this. So as things evolve, we also notice that words like the, of, and, which, to, etc. are very highly used words. Like the word the is 1 out of every 6 words that we use. And so the top 20% of words used constitute 80% of all vocabulary. So, but that's not just English, that's Chinese and Russian and Portuguese and fucking all of them applied to the same Pareto distribution.
Right.
So what the hell is that? And then that's also visible in the amount, 20% of the floor space in this room gets 80% of the walking, right? So how does this, nobody ever walks in that corner, but everybody walks right there from the doorway to the stage here. So now, I
feel sorry for that corner. I think I'll go walk over there.
I gotta go walk in that corner a bit, give it some love.
Yeah, this is of course an empirical observation about the world, right? And so when we use various distributions in probabilistic models, we tend to choose distributions that exhibit that sort of 80-20 rule, because it then gives us the right priors for how we're going to learn about that world. It also helps us, obviously, in the machine learning. Or, I don't know, maybe that's not so obvious. So here's the thing that makes the Pareto principle, or Zipf's law, so important for the way kids learn language, is that if you try to learn all of English at the same time, or all of Chinese, or all of Spanish, or all of whatever at the same time, you're not going to succeed. it's really tough because of that kind of complexity over here. How do we actually tackle that kind of complexity?
We followed this law. We followed the
Learn the easy stuff,
first. The most commonly
the
used
most common
words.
names or nouns first. The common verbs first, right? Because that gives you an anchor. You may not understand eat, blah, 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 but after a while you got eat, right? And you kind of know that's an important separator. And what comes right before and what comes right after eat is really important. And then you start honing in on that.
And if you remember the word like comer in Spanish, and then someone's talking, and then all of a sudden you would like, oh, they said eat in the sentence, because I at least I caught there something. Yeah.
Right, and it's interesting. It's telling how that's the word that you are focusing on.
Yeah.
I'm hungry too.
I do. Yeah.
But you know, like this is
or correr, run. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And in fact, that kind of behavior, so you know, like the mathematical breakthroughs in machine translation modeling that we worked on, actually the way they attack that is specifically by being able to hone in on that kind of learning behavior. And I won't get into the gory combinatorial math here, but like it's, if you can have a probabilistic or neural machine learning model where having a word like eat has been anchored for you, and then focus on what comes immediately before or after that, and how that translates into your more useful language, then that's where you can start to make headway on learning that space even with that small amount of data.
The Pareto principle applying to children learning language is so
language
crucial.
Yeah.
Okay. We have another friend, Basil, in DC that studies language, and he is so interesting. And I should talk to him more. Now, I have a question that Ron initially brought up about language, universal language, and then you replied by talking about the relatability between languages. So where does the next era of relatability between languages and between each other, between the objects, what is this next era of relatability?
From a science point of view or from a social point of view?
Maybe from them together?
I just had an epiphany. The animals already have discovered this. It's, with the birds chirps and the dolphin and the lion roar. That's the language. Maybe they all understand each other's little noises. No, I'm just being silly here, but it's a possibility. Maybe the whole purpose of evolution is to go from this human thing to, an animal. Hate to.
But is there something that can be progressed to that is a shorter, more effective use of me vibrating vocal cords and you going, aha, I know what you're saying?
I mean, I think there's really a lot. On the scientific side, we're still pushing heavily on how to make those models that learn the relatability even more efficient in terms of being able to take small amounts of data and make very efficient generalizations correctly out of them. At a social level, I think it's really, really critical, again, because of the times that we are now living in. When I finished my work at Berkeley, my Ph.D. work, I was thinking, okay, what am I going to apply this new paradigm of probabilistic machine learning approaches to? And the reason I chose to work on translation is precisely because we're living in a time where it's becoming, at the same time that you have these exponential technologies, it also means that we're living in a time of exponential risk because these technologies can be applied for all sorts of destructive aims, and
we just had Roman Yampolsky on last night talking about AI safety and security. Yeah.
That's great. I was in the same meeting as him yesterday all day.
You were?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
So this is really a time when it's almost like anybody can walk into a 7-Eleven and buy weapons of mass destruction. It's getting so easy to build really, really exponentially cheap and exponentially dangerous things.
Yes.
And so, to me, relatability is super important, because the only chance I see of the race's survival is if we can also exponentially increase the relatability between people, between groups, so that this ridiculous amount of destructive power isn't just triggered and brought in all the time. And that's a tall order. I mean, this is something that humanity has not mastered for eons.
Yeah, we were talking about that a lot yesterday, about war. How is it just going to all of a sudden turn into peace? It requires all 7.5 billion people to somehow figure out how to relate to each other, if that's even possible. We talked about it potentially even being not possible for that to happen.
No, exactly.
We ask that question a lot.
The history of humanity has been, up until now, our ability to outrun the power of the technologies we invent. Coming to the new world, whatever. And we've sort of reached that limit. I mean, I know there are a few people that are thinking about running into space. Not a whole lot of the species is going to be able to do that, as far as I can see, within the time frame that we need. So I think we really need to be focusing on a problem that I call exponential peacemaking, because without that, we're going extinct.
You say that like it's a bad thing. No, I'm just playing.
Part of me also agrees with Ron as well. Like, if it's, so be it. Exponential peacemaking, important to pass along. But this human experiment has all this. There's so many of these little rocks orbiting stars with little populations on them that have evolved in with different variables. So. Maybe it is. Maybe the Fermi filter holds true for once the intelligence comes that they can't figure it out. Maybe we do figure it out.
We have to shift and conscious, and there's people among us that enjoy inflicting pain, and there's people among us that don't, and it's that's the division.
Yeah.
So we ask about artificial general intelligence, we ask about biowarfare, because these things are becoming cheaper and cheaper. So is, strapping a gun to a drone, or so is even biowarfare, manufacturing anything that can just transmit through even air and just get right to somebody else. Then we also ask about wealth inequality on the show a lot. Like, what are we going to do about socioeconomic status there being such a big gap between the ultra rich and the poor? I think Pinker is very smart, and I talk about him a decent amount on the show for indicating that everyone on the bottom is slowly coming up. That's a fantastic thesis to talk about and to educate people on, because I think it overall tells people that, it's actually going up for everybody. But the up for everybody doesn't solve the more major concern, which is what's going on as the people at the top are going way, way up, way faster than the people on the bottom have a much slower growth rate. Yeah. And so we talk about these questions a lot on the show, and it's good to hear some of your perspective about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. I mean, pretty much everything that I am working on is targeted at that problem right now. Exponential peacemaking is a great concept, but to actually take it from the abstract into concrete reality, it means tackling problems like that. How do you tackle problems like that? These are cultural problems. These are mindset problems, which means these are problems that are framed by the language that the problems or the situations are discussed in terms of. we really need to think about how we're framing these problems. And a lot of the work that I'm working on now, which is, like this is all stuff that isn't even out there yet. It's the next paradigm shift, is how do we shift the work that we've been pioneering over the last several decades on getting machines to reframe things from one human, from Chinese into English or from Spanish into Arabic or whatever. How do we now shift that toward helping us to reframe ideas in more healthy ways that help us to focus on the key problems that we need to tackle? How do we help people to reframe their perception of maybe a problem that had been previously dismissed and is slowly getting out of control and is going to generate exactly the kind of tensions that we just talked about needing to avoid, and help people to understand why is that problem actually serious, and why is it a problem I care about?
We just had a conversation about this also a couple nights ago. After the Michael Pollan event, we chatted about the importance of slipping in the importance of these conversations into society in a way where people don't even know that it got slipped in there and that now all of a sudden they're talking about it. So just like we don't really know that the words the, of, which, to, and, that we don't really know that those words became slipped into our language. We don't really study that much. Most people don't. Similarly to if all of a sudden exponential peacemaking and artificial general intelligence and these concepts, these abstract thoughts become more embedded into our the 20% of words that we use most often, which then constitute 80% of all conversation, then all of a sudden we might actually be onto something.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's interesting. I like that.
And like more than 90% of what we do, we're not aware of. It's what in psychology, the distinction is between automatic processing and conscious processing. And 90% of what we do is below the level of conscious awareness. But that is where the meat is. That is where we need to relate to each other. So I think
the autonomic nervous system, the blinking and the breathing and the...
Yeah, well, above that level.
Even above that, like moving...
I mean, above the brainstem level, but like sort of, things like going back to the cut example.
Oh, food.
If I say, how do you cut disk space? You don't have to think about which sense of cut is that.
Because
That
I
never
got
rises
that right
to the
away.
level of your conscious awareness.
I process that.
All of that is
that.
automatic inference.
Conscious might be like making a decision then about something that you actually need to consciously contemplate for a little bit.
Right. That you have to reflect. It's a reflective reasoning.
Reflective reasoning.
Introspective reasoning, right? We don't do that very much.
You're right. Almost so much of the reality is automatic. Yeah.
I mean, every word of every sentence that you say is pretty much many way ambiguous in the same way as the word cut was.
Yeah, exactly.
And yet none of us are thinking consciously about any of that.
Yeah. So much of what goes on is totally automatically part of social fabric in the way that we interact and the way that we abide to the political and economic fabric of the world. Where are we at with the dialogue agents?
They're still kind of nice toys right now. I mean, they're useful. I mean, the Siris, the Alexas, the assistants.
I've seen them get into emotions now, where you can talk to an actual human on the 2D plane, and they'll like have their, they will never get angry at you. They'll always be kind. I just find this really interesting now.
Yeah. I mean, this is all. It's good to model. It's not too hard, actually, surprisingly. The hard stuff's still not being tackled. The way these dialogue agents that are out in the commercial world right now work, they're still very nice hacks. they make mistakes no 3-year-old would make. Do I have time to show you another example?
Why don't you show us? Did you have the other one lined up that you wanted to show?
Yeah, I can do that.
Just
give me a second. Let me line it up.
We'll keep it quick, but I want you to be able to show what you've been working on. This one, yes.
If you think about what a 3-year-old kid does, right? The kind of language that 3-year-olds use. There's a typical example, right? Where does it go?
Mm-hmm.
And 3-year-olds have no problem with this kind of thing. And so the problem is that if you think about how other languages express the same idea, right? So this is Chinese. And Chinese, you might say, Gai fan er. There's the common word where.
Goes there. Uh-huh.
But nothing else is common, right? What this sort of says is should put where.
Should put where. Uh-huh.
Right? And nothing is in common. And yet they mean the same thing. Kids have no problems with it from either language.
Yeah.
And before you say, oh, it's just Chinese and English are so different, here's Swedish. Right?
Swedish
is one of the closest languages to English.
Vart ska det?
And yet, same problem. Only the word where is in common, right? And the Swedish sort of says, where should that?
Where should that?
In fact, the Swedish shares more in common with the Chinese than the
English.
Right? And so, this is the kind of problem that we're still facing, right? When you ask about dialogue agents, why do they make mistakes that no 3-year-old would make? It's because the kind of AI that those very nice hacks is built out of doesn't even try to tackle this problem of the fact that the meaning is as much in what's not said as in what is said, right? We've done this for dozens of languages. And kids have absolutely no problem with whichever language, but you feed it to a machine to translate and it gets them all wrong, right? That's how weak our AI today still is. And this is why I think it's worth the fascination of really focusing on these questions of strong AI. Like, how do we tackle the real AI problems? We're living in a time when obviously there's massive AI hype all over the place, right? And everybody's grabbing toolkits off the shelf, feeding it big pieces of data, turning the crank, and oh, look, magic. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit there. There's a lot of good ways to make money there.
Like you said, the small changes are going to be the ones that make some more big change.
But it's 80-20 rule again, right?
Yeah.
Shifting the work to be able to handle these kinds of issues is going to have a massive effect.
Yeah, this is relatability, this is language, this is what we talked about today. Cognitive science, evolution, the development of the human mind from childhood, and the way that we have built civilization using language and relatability. You were very interesting, Dakai. I really enjoyed having you on the show.
Such a pleasure to be on the show. Thank you for having me here.
I'm trying to figure out why I got offended when he said how weak artificial intelligence is. It makes me question, who am I? Why did I get offended when you said that? It's crazy. Talk about thoughts. Go ahead. I just wanted to throw that in the mix.
Wait, but how did that feeling of being offended actually feel?
I don't know, but he just said that, this is how weak our artificial intelligence is. It's something. It was like an attack on me. I don't get it.
You've absorbed so much of San Francisco hype now, Ron.
I am not real. This is a machine.
Dakai, can we go through a quick final questions with you that we ask on the show?
Sure.
What's the most beautiful thing in the world?
Oh my God, I should have done my homework. Wow, that's a challenging one. Wow. Such a simple question. It's such an amazing question. The images that run through my mind and the feelings that run through my mind, everything flashes through my head from these incredible mountains in the Karakoram range, gigantic. It's the range where K2 is.
That's the one. By Mount Everest, where K2 is.
So Everest is in the Himalayas.
Yep.
So the Himalayas are an older mountain range, and so they're all rounded. The Karakorums are basically the same height. You know, K2 differs from the height of Everest only by a tiny, insignificant amount. But they're a young range.
They're younger range.
So they're like super jagged. And I remember sitting in this little village in Pakistan before everything went crazy in Pakistan, long before that. And you know, sipping my chai and admiring this huge mountain, jagged, beautiful, and there are like rivers and ice and everything, and just admiring it. And then the clouds lifted, and I realized that was a foothill, and the mountain was there.
Oh, damn. Yeah.
I mean, that's just one of the images that ran through my head.
That's a good one. I like the visual that you painted for that. Look at this place. It's freaking incredible. I mean, K2 is like right there, right? Like ish?
Yeah, exactly.
That is right there, if we missed it earlier. Yeah.
Very good.
Like there's so much beauty on this planet, and then there's the beauty in how we've evolved and communicated. It's so difficult to actually pick things. Do you think we're alone in the cosmos?
As a good scientist, I'm going to say I don't know. I kind of doubt it. Chances are not high of that if you look at it scientifically.
Do you think advanced civilizations are roaming the cosmos?
As a good scientist, I'm going to say I don't know. Chances are not bad.
Yeah.
Why are they avoiding us? Is that what you're asking?
There's a bunch of zoo hypotheses. There's so many of those. Well, do you think that we're in a computer simulation?
These are your standard questions?
We have more. We have a list of like 100 of these.
Yeah, we sort of already went on the solipsism.
We did a little, yeah.
Yeah, as a good scientist, I'm just saying I don't know. And how could you know?
If you pay attention, it's a suggestion that it is. It's a game. It's not a simulation. We do have free will, and these are machines, and it's just a game, and it's fascinating. But you have to focus on that. You know, if you're busy doing other things, you know, if all you were to do is focus on that question, the answer would be, unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
I'm not a good scientist.
Are you hoping for, like, you know, I don't know, like little matrix like glitches somewhere that are going to
like Blade Runner. I haven't seen the new one, but I think it suggests, or Tron was another old movie, you know.
Sure.
So
Matrix, the actual movie.
Yeah,
but
I'm sorry.
You're right, though.
I'm dumb.
No, you're right, though. The more you look, the more you find as well. It's the same thing when you look at a tree. The more you look, the more you realize, oh, there's a squirrel running. Oh, look at the way the sunlight's hitting the leaves. You know, the longer you look, the more you find.
That's true. Let me turn the question around, though.
Sure.
Is there a difference?
Yeah, we've had that counter question asked, and the most important answer to that question that I've found so far is that the study of simulation theory itself is so consciousness expanding and awareness enhancing that in itself is why we talk about it, because it gives us such a good understanding of things, or better understanding of the actual world that we live in, and all of the variables that are being calculated in order to produce the reality that we live in. But the crunching of those variables is different across different rocks orbiting stars and different time periods of evolution. But the answer to the question about it there being a difference, we don't quite know. If you knew this was reality versus if you knew this was a simulation, how would it change your behavior today? We're not quite sure.
Oh, I see. That's it. Oh, okay. Here's a different way. We're talking about the ambiguity of language. Of what difference means, right? So, like, is there a difference between reality and a simulation?
Okay, I'm following what you're saying.
So here's the thing, right? When we ask that question, we're doing objectification again. You've objectified this notion of reality.
Yeah.
But so we reality is a thing. Now we can hold it. Now we can manipulate it. We're more comfortable with it. But reality isn't really a thing.
Well, yeah, so what's the difference?
It's a metaphor. It's a model.
Between a reality and a simulation. What is the difference between them?
And so if I really go back to what I was
one's
touching on
simulated
before,
and one's not.
with the emphasis on subjectiveness, on what we really focus on is this ability to relate, to shift between different frames.
Yes.
Then what reality is irrelevant. Like whether there is even such a thing as reality, because that's the object, right? So you're talking about how do my mind relate? How does my mind relate to reality? Mm-hmm. I've already objectified this thing called reality, which is a metaphor. This is something that I'm modeling my percepts with.
Okay, so then we can bring it to the subjective interpretation of existence. And then whether or not it's a reality or a simulation is secondary to just the way that you subjectively interpret what's going on.
Right, it's really my interpretation process. That's the thing that's really happening.
Yeah, but your interpretation
I'm getting a little
process,
bit too Buddhist about this,
I think. I like it though, and your music has Buddhist tendencies within it. Do you the way that you're perceiving things though, the perception of it and the understanding of it that's going on, that itself might not actually be you doing that.
Sure.
Okay, so then I guess that's the difference between the reality and the simulation. Is it actually you doing the relating, or is it simulation?
Do you like recursion?
I know 0.001% about recursion.
Well, I mean, here very simply, when you say, "Is it you doing it?" What is you? We've just objectified again.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, we did. Okay, so.
I realize I'm kind of going, is it turtles all the way down?
This is interesting, though. I think we need to unpack this at least another just little bit, because this is probably some of the more interesting simulation conversation we've had. But we should definitely bring the show to an end. But I'm liking where this is going. This is interesting. I really appreciate you bringing this up. Who is the you? What is the you?
What is the I without time?
What is the I without time?
There you go.
So, Dekai, thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Thank you very much. Real pleasure.
I had such a good time, and we learned so much about language and music and relatability, development of the species, how we actually got to where we are today. What you showed us was, actually bringing in those examples of visually is really interesting as well. And actually, we'll put the link for Reorientate on the bio as well.
Oh, great.
So we can get some of your music listened to.
Great.
Get some more of your music listened to. Check out.
Just all about relatability.
Dekai's music, yes.
And cognitive ambiguities and illusions.
That's interesting. We'll definitely give it a listen. Put the link in the bio. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. If you guys had a good time, give the content to share with other people. Definitely give us a comment below, subscribe, let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And if you think that you're done by just watching this, you're not. You got to go create with this now. So go write about it, go make a video about it, go and start something yourself in helping people better understand relatability. And join us on Patreon. Help us support the studio. Help us keep growing this endeavor. We'd love to have your support. And thanks to our producing partner, Ron Vargas, Alfredo, as well, our team. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you soon.